Hey, where you learn that from?
Grand Theft Auto 3?
Word? Can I borrow that?
You got a PlayStation 2?
Nah, I got Gamecast.
Gamecast? Well, there's GameCube and then there's Dreamcast. What you got?
Well, I said I got Gamecast, man. Damn, I can't afford it.
My bad. I'm just trying to help you out.
Hello and welcome to JGB Podcast. I'm Jeff and I'm here today with Ben and Grant.
How's it going?
Hey.
For those of you who don't know, our podcast is mainly built around 1, current issues in the gaming world, 2, gaming news, and 3, we are going to incorporate some audience feedback and audience participation in our show in a way that we will explain towards the end of it.
On today's show, the issue we'll be talking about, we've dubbed the split screen issue, so we'll be talking about split screen gaming and the state of it in today's world. Next, the E3 Expo just wrapped up out in California, and we'll talk about all the major news to come out of that and what we're excited about. And lastly, we'll wrap it up with some audience participation, some questions, as well as submissions from the audience and our reactions to them.
Sounds like a plan.
There we go. All right, so first, let's start off by talking about the split-screen gaming that is becoming a widely talked about
issue
in the gaming society.
So, I'll dive right into it.
Okay.
So, one of the biggest things that we saw last fall was a lot of games incorporated a lot of online features.
Right.
However, it seems that they are straying away from incorporating a split screen feature. So we're all familiar with what split screening is, right? It's where you're sitting in a room with another person or 2 or 3 and you're basically playing games. Each person's player is on a separate corner of the screen, basically, and you're competing with each other in the same room. So this was a very common thing a few years ago, I guess, but it's becoming a lot less common now.
Right.
And there's a lot of different reasonings for this from a business perspective, but we need to dive deeper into whether or not it's the right move for developers to stop implementing this feature.
Right. All right, so Ben, what do you think about that? What is your opinion on this?
Well, I've had a lot of great memories playing split-screen games with friends. I remember my favorite game to play was Star Wars Battlefront. I would go over to a friend's house. I would play that game so much with my friends.
Right.
We had like these little cheats that we would put in to make us like invincible and give us infinite ammo and stuff. So it was a really cool thing. And I remember, so I read something in Jane McGonigal's book pretty recently that said something about, so you get some sort of happy embarrassment when you're playing split screen games against other people. You build trust in each other because of the split screen feature, I guess. And really it just brings out a lot of positive qualities in people. That being said, is it necessary? I don't know. That's really not something.
I think for us, though, we grew up in a generation where that was very common. There weren't very many games that had online playability. Like, you couldn't play multiplayer online.
Yeah.
And now it's to the point where games only allow online play, and there's no split-screen mode, I guess you would say. So I think for us, it's very nostalgic to think about having split-screen gaming because that was once such a huge part of our lives.
Oh,
but
yeah.
now it's becoming less and less common over.
Yeah, and just to jump in off that, I think obviously we're going to cover sort of the reasoning behind why the industry is maybe moving away from split-screen gaming.
Right.
But from an emotional standpoint, to kind of jump off what Ben was saying, some of my favorite memories growing up playing video games is, when the first Halo came out, that was pre-Xbox Live, which seems like such a crazy thing to think about nowadays, but there was no Xbox Live, so you had the 4 quadrants of the screen, and you and your buddies each had your own Spartan that you were playing with. And, you had multiplayer maps that you played on just like you do nowadays in Halo. But back then, you had your friends right there in the room with you.
Right.
And if you did something cool, like maybe you stuck them with a plasma grenade or you did a headshot, you had them right there to sort of, give them a hard time that you beat them. And I think that's something that maybe once we get into the specs of the reasoning why the industry's moving away, we can understand why they are. But from an emotional standpoint, I think that I'll miss that aspect of split screen gaming. You can't really replace that feeling of being in the room with your friends versus just playing over faceless people over Xbox Live.
And I don't think it's like, from what I've seen, I don't think that it's necessarily gonna completely go away. You look at Nintendo, for example. Nintendo has a lot of different experiences, like party games and things like that, where split screen's pretty common.
Like Mario, I mean.
Like even Mario, right? Like basically Nintendo is, I'd say, like the best at incorporating these experiences. But you can definitely understand, I guess, where businesses are coming from when they say that they don't want to incorporate this feature. So like Halo 5, for example, I know we were looking at that one especially. They didn't incorporate it, one, because they said that frame rates suffered and the graphics basically suffered because of it. And also, you know, they're obviously not going to say this, but from a business standpoint, it makes a lot more sense to have them get on an online service, pay for more content, pay to play against other people. And, you know, that's not a bad thing.
No.
Gamers love getting new content, especially when it's good. But there is definitely something that feels like it's missing, especially from these games like Halo, where you grew up playing against other people and suddenly it's just gone.
Yep.
You can't do it unless you're playing in separate places.
Right, and I mean, you could argue with Halo, multiplayer was arguably what sold it. I mean, the campaign, we all remember it. It was so incredible, but I think the reason why I got into Halo in the first place and almost anybody else was the word of mouth of how incredible it was, that this multiplayer option that people had almost never seen before, and playing with your friends, it was such a fun time. And I definitely understand from a business standpoint why maybe the developers are moving away from it, but it's just unfortunate to see that it's almost like Nintendo is the only person sort of keeping split screen gaming afloat versus these flagship IPs like Call of Duty and Halo, which almost made their money and became a brand off of multiplayer gaming, seem to almost be getting rid of the thing that made them so great in the first place.
I think a huge thing is that there's not enough people who want split-screen gaming.
There's not enough people who speak up about it.
Exactly. No one, because it's not a huge deficit when that happens. We're not devastated by this being taken away. It just kind of sucks because, you know, that was something that we love to do. But I think
it's almost like a part of our childhood is dying.
Exactly. It's very hard to see games now as just online and not being able to play with 3 other people in the same room as you.
And it's almost one of those things that you almost feel like maybe you're looking at it with a pair of rose-colored glasses.
Right.
Because, I mean, we remember it as this incredible thing, but now we have Xbox Live and the PlayStation Network, and would we really trade those things to get back split-screen gaming?
Yeah, no.
I don't think so.
No.
But it's one of those things that I feel like I would never trade what we have for what once was, but can either of them coexist together? I mean, I would love to see games like Halo bring back that split-screen gaming, just for the nostalgia factor of how fun it is to play against your friends in a room together.
Would you rather have frame rates and graphics suffer in order to get this feature back? Do you think that that's a good trade-off?
Well, I think that in today's society, it seems like graphics are the end-all, be-all.
Right.
A game can be as fun as you want, but if it doesn't have the 60 frames per second, the 1080p graphics, then people just immediately dismiss it.
You see all like the fanboys who are like, oh, it's not 1080p, 60 frames per second, not buying.
There was a couple of Xbox games that came out with only 720, and it was like the world was going to end.
Oh my gosh.
I think I care more about the gameplay than the graphics, so I think I would be willing to let it suffer a little bit. Whether that would mean it would only suffer while you're playing split screen versus it would just make the entire game suffer, I think that's a different argument, because if it brings down the entire game, then maybe there's something to be said with getting rid of split screen gaming. But I think that if it was only in that multiplayer game mode it made the frame rate suffer, I think people would be willing to sacrifice a couple of frames to be able to get split screen gaming back.
There's a common saying, right? And it's like, kids today will never know, right?
Yeah, right.
So if you take that and say, like, gamers today will never know what it felt like to be in the same room as somebody else and cooperate with somebody else and basically interact with somebody else while in these settings. They just don't know. They don't. I don't. At least from what I've seen, they're just all online now, so it's just I feel like a lot of them would say, yeah, we want this split screen feature, especially for games like Halo.
Yep.
But I feel like a lot of gamers aren't willing, based on propaganda from these gaming companies, to decrease the frame rates and the graphics in order to get these split screen environments, I guess.
I feel like if that would happen, there would be too many people who would be pissed and would complain that the 60 frames and 1080p are like a huge part of the game, and there would be a big debate on that.
And I almost wonder if, because it's been phased out more and more as the years have gone on, if our age group is sort of that last group that knew what split screen gaming was when we were kids.
Right.
And if it would even be that big of a deal to people, say, in high school or even younger now, if split screen gaming just went by the wayside. Because I think a lot of people younger than us have only known split screen gaming, like we talked about, through Nintendo products. I mean, the Super Smash Bros. And the Mario Karts of the world, everybody knows those and the split screen multiplayer. But since Xbox Live has been around for the last 10 years plus, I don't know how many people younger than even 18 years old ever experienced a game like Halo or Call of Duty playing against 3 of their friends in a room versus only understanding what it's like to play against people all over the world on, the online platform.
Right. So it remains to be seen what will happen with this, but I think we can all agree that it's something that game developers should really consider, should really look at in the future. And they should really understand what gamers want. And most importantly, I think that the people who are playing these games need to speak up. They need to tell the game developers that this is an important issue.
Yep.
So we'll see in the future what happens with it. But I guess for now, we have to deal with what we get. I guess now we can transition into our next topic, which is the big gaming convention that was in Los Angeles this week. Just wrapped up. It's called the Electronic Entertainment Expo, for those who don't know, or E3. So a lot of cool things were shown off. There was a lot of talk before the show from people who said that the show was dying, that with Activision, who makes like a bunch of really cool titles like Destiny and Call of Duty, they pulled out of the show, and Disney pulled out of the show, which I don't understand why that would be.
Disney pulled out?
Yeah, Disney. Well, see, I don't even think Disney's making games anymore, so I don't understand like what the argument is with Disney. I can understand Activision, but I don't. After seeing this show, I beg to differ about the show dying out.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that, and I think if there's one thing that I wish the show would have is I would love if Nintendo would go back to having a press conference, because I think, and obviously we're going to mostly focus on Microsoft and Sony because they're the two heavy hitters from the expo, but that being said, I would love to see Nintendo sort of come back into the fold, because I think that, to get a foothold back in the industry, you start having to do what the rest of the people in the industry do. That's sort of just my Nintendo fanboy coming out, I guess. I'd really love to see, sort of the Zeldas and the Marios of the world sort of become mainstream again and not seen as kiddie games. But I think obviously the one thing we want to focus on is what everybody talks about is between Microsoft and Sony, who won E3 in a sense, is the argument that happens at the end of every single year.
Yeah. So I watched all the press conferences. I believe you all are also watched quite a few of them.
Right.
Got some highlights on them. So Microsoft came out and they showed off. Well, they began the show by showing off the Xbox One S or Slim, and at the end of the show, they showed off Project Scorpio, which is their new Xbox One. It's supposed to have 6 teraflops of computing power, 4K visuals, 60 frames per second on all games. But a lot of people criticized them for showing off this new Xbox Slim and then coming back right at the end of the show and saying, "Oh, well, we also have this new, more powerful console coming out in the future." A lot of people are like, "So what's the point of buying an Xbox One S to begin with?"
Yeah, right. If it's not even not even a year later, you're gonna get the new, more powerful Xbox One.
Right.
It's
So do you think there's any justification for buying the Xbox One S, or is it just kind of like a bad strategy for Microsoft to show it off in the first place?
I think it was a very interesting move by Microsoft to release the S at this time and then also to announce Project Scorpio, only because it seems like with there being another E3 in between now and when Scorpio would be released, that's something that they could have saved for E3 2017. It really just doesn't make a lot of sense to me why you would release all this information about a new system and then decide that you're going to also release information about a system that's going to be far superior to that system, pretty much only incentivizing people to buy your old system because of the price point and how cheap it is. I mean, it really didn't make a whole lot of sense to me. I don't know if they're going for that niche of people that only buy systems once they see the price drop to a certain level, but I really couldn't really wrap my head around Microsoft's decision there.
Well, so we just talked about how this generation especially is a big power struggle, right? So Xbox has been attacked quite a bit for being less powerful than PlayStation. So I can understand why they would announce that this is coming, because they want those people who care so much about power to kind of be swayed to come over to their side, right? In addition, we know that Sony is announcing they're also going to have a new console. It's like codenamed the Neo right now, I believe. So Microsoft, I believe, or what I would think is they want to kind of get the edge, get these people excited for their console early on, so that they feel more inclined in I guess to get it in the future. And what they said in the press conference also is they wanted to let developers know that it was coming out so that they could begin utilizing it, which I don't quite believe, because it's not like they haven't already told developers that this is coming.
Right.
So I can see what they were trying to do with such a power struggle, but it does make you question if it was the right move to make, because now their competitors can look at their hardware and can be like, oh, okay, so we need to up our power a little bit to compete. But
yeah, a big part of me wonders if this was really just a move to, like we talked about before, quote unquote, win E3. Maybe Microsoft sort of caught wind of the fact that PlayStation has a new system coming out, but that they were not going to be showcasing it at their E3 showcase. And so they figured that this was their chance to sort of show off some new hardware and, in a sense, pull all the positive news coverage towards their end of the aisle, because if you've been covering E3 the last couple of years, you've known that it's sort of been Sony's expo every single year. People sort of have a consensus agreement that they win it every single year. So the cynic in me thinks that maybe Microsoft saw this as their opportunity to finally, sort of pull some of the fans over to their side of the aisle.
Right. I think it's more of a competition move than it is a strategic move for Microsoft. I think Sony wasn't expecting it, and I feel like Microsoft wanted to get the edge on them, and that's that.
I mean, we're gonna have to see how this plays out in the future. It could be a good move, but it could also be a bad one. So
yeah,
it really remains to be seen where it goes from here. But it was definitely a questionable move.
Yep.
We'll say that. So, I mean, hardware obviously isn't the only thing that is shown off at E3. So let's see. So EA had their press conference on Sunday, followed by Bethesda. And then we had Microsoft, Ubisoft, Sony, and then the next day we had Nintendo. Did you guys see anything that really stood out to you from these shows?
You go ahead, because
Well, I definitely think that there was a lot of interesting games coming out. One thing that I noticed from it was that it seems like there are a lot of sort of games coming out that are based off previous IPs but are sort of reimaginings of it. Like Battlefield 1 is from the Battlefield franchise, but rather than continuing the Modern Warfare kick, they're going back to World War One, which I think will be interesting. And then you saw God of War, 4, which is showing an older version of Kratos and sort of a reimagining of him as a character. So I thought it was interesting because there's a lot of games that are sort of getting a new coat of paint in a sense. And so there's a lot of stuff to be excited about, but I don't know if there's any games that I saw that sort of wowed me that I didn't already know what the franchise was previously.
So you talked about Battlefield. I had not before seen the new Battlefield 1, like any previews of it, and when I watched it just a couple hours ago, that was incredible. Like I was never a huge fan of Battlefield. I played the first one and completely forgot about it, and now it seems like they came back with a vengeance. Like this was like their time to shine. This was a great idea. World War One game has not happened in a long time, I would say.
I don't know if it's ever happened. I mean, not in recent gaming development,
no.
but
I know World War II. They have World War II, but
yeah, World War II was big, like probably 10 years ago, I'd say.
Yeah.
And a lot of shooters have gone back to this futuristic kind of too much wall running.
Oh, yeah,
just I mean, Call of Duty has been getting a lot of flack for that this year, so Battlefield has really picked up steam for a lot of people.
Almost as an aside, too, it's interesting to see what this Battlefield game will do for the industry because, like you said, World War II was sort of beaten like a dead horse, as the saying goes.
Right.
And then Call of Duty sort of saw the error of its ways and made Modern Warfare. And then that was released, and then every single game became either a modern shooter or a futuristic shooter because that seemed to be what consumers wanted. So if Battlefield 1 is a success, we could possibly see the industry shifting back to being more historical shooters rather than continuing the Call of Duty trend right now, which seems to be continued to sort of invent technology that hasn't existed yet.
Yeah.
And pretend like someday that'll be a part of warfare, I guess.
But now the new one, what is it, Infinity Warfare or
Infinite Warfare?
Infinite Warfare is like Star Wars.
Right.
Which is cool. I love Star Wars and I love Star Wars games, but if you're trying to implement a warfare and coming from what Call of Duty used to be to what it is now, it's mixing too much into futuristic, and I don't think Call of Duty should have done
Call of Duty is not supposed to be a futuristic shooter.
No, I agree.
It is supposed to be a boots on the ground shooter.
Yeah.
And a lot of people, understandably, are not happy that it continues to trend in the way it shouldn't. So we'll have to see how Battlefield does. I have a feeling it's going to sell a lot better than its previous games. One other thing that stood out to me, I guess, I really enjoyed Ubisoft's conference. I traditionally do enjoy their conferences, actually. They had a couple really cool games coming out called, we discussed this earlier, Steep is one of them, which is that snowboarding game where you're on the mountains.
That's
that one looked really cool. It's obviously not for everybody, but
no.
It definitely looks cool for me, at least. For Honor, the Viking, what is it, Viking, Samurai and Medieval Knight. They're all fighting against each other, and that one looks pretty cool. But Ubisoft tends to downgrade their graphics quite a bit, so we'll have to see how that turns out when the games are actually released. But yeah, I mean, I'd say for the most part, the show was. I don't understand why people say that this show is dying out, because from what I saw, it's still very popular, and I believe it will be for quite a few more years to come.
Yeah, I mean, I can see why some people might think that the Expo doesn't need to exist anymore, what with the internet, and you can just sort of release trailers on YouTube, but I think there's still a lot to be said about the conferences that they do. I mean, the way they present the games, it builds so much hype around it. And it's also a way for people like Microsoft and Sony to, like we saw, debut new hardware for their systems. So I really don't see it going away anytime soon. And I think that in the modern day, it's nice to have sort of an event that builds up the hype machine, especially during the summer months when notoriously games seem to kind of dry up for a while there until the holiday season rolls around. So I think it's something that I definitely personally would like to see keep going, because it sort of is like the oasis in the desert during the summer to kind of keep you knowing that there's more games coming out. Whereas, once February hits, sometimes you get a little bit sad.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying. And, we could go on and on about this. And I think in our next podcast, we're probably going to explore it a little bit more.
Yep.
But for right now, let's quickly, before the show wraps up, transition into some audience feedback, reactions to the topics we talked about today. We had a couple individuals who were kind enough to write into the show, tell us what they think about the split screen issue in particular.
Right.
So Lainey Grady said, I think it's harder to deal with a video game when there are multiple screens because it is hard to focus on my own.
Which I agree with that. I feel like it, and it's a lot of the problem is like screen cheating, like people looking off of other screens. So I feel like that. But I also feel like that's part, like when you grow up with it, you don't really notice those kinds of things. So I agree with what she's saying.
Yeah, I can understand her point. It's a very valid point, I'd say. Thanks, Lainey. We appreciate you writing in. And then you want to read the second one?
Yeah, so our second write-in was from Peter, who talked about the split screen issue and said, for number one, I think it all depends on the type of game it is. Games where it has a multiplayer mode with a large map like Halo, Call of Duty, etc. are definitely necessary to have, at least for me. This is what makes these games fun. I prefer playing against people I know in the same room, and having split screens is the most effective way to do so. And I definitely think that all three of us, based on what we talked about earlier, would agree with Peter on this. I mean, those games, Halo, Call of Duty, etc., I mean, we touched on it earlier, but split screen just felt like such an important part of the games growing up, and so it's almost sad to see it go.
Yeah, I totally agree with you, Peter. That's a very, very solid point. Okay, well, thank you to the people who wrote in, especially. Thank you for the listeners who took their time out of the day to listen to segments. Feel free to write in to our next podcasts, and we will take some of your comments and talk about them. So our next podcast will probably be on E3 a little bit more. We'll cover in a more diverse segment what happened during the shows, what there is to look forward to. But for the most part, thank you again for listening.
Definitely.
I'm Ben Jones.
Grant Pusinelli.
I'm Jeff Carr, and this is JGB Podcast.
Thanks again, guys.
Thank you.